Welcome to A Canadian Investing in the U.S., a podcast and YouTube channel focused on Canadians buying real estate, with host Glen Sutherland.
Welcome to another episode of A Canadian Investing in the U.S. This week I'm going to do a show with just myself. Originally I was making a list of different tasks I do for running my real estate business across the border. The reason I was doing it was so that I could try to automate as much of this whole process as possible. But I thought, you know what? This actually might be really interesting for some of the listeners who have the fear of going across the border and they're not sure about what everything I do every month and what's actually involved in doing this cross-border thing. In this episode, I'm not going to get into acquisitions and searching for lenders. I'm talking about once you have the property stabilized, meaning that the reno is complete, the tenants are living in the property, property management is set up. So once everything is good is what we're going to talk about. So what I do want to talk about is dealing with your property management and running like a day-to-day business and what the tasks specifically are that I do every month. I also wanted to do this show to get back to talking about U.S. real estate instead of what we've been doing a lot recently was with general real estate, like a lot of real estate that applies to Canadians and Americans, which was a little broader, but I wanted to sort of pinpoint down a little bit more just for one or two more episodes here. So let's just get into it. So what I do, I usually wait until about halfway through the month just because sometimes the rent won't be in from whatever, or they haven't done their deposits, or the property management, just to have everything all lined up. But then I log in. What I do first is I check my U.S. credit card, and I want to verify what's on the card. The typical things I see on my American credit card every month are my Google Drive fees, because I pay to store this podcast up online. I've got to a point where I don't like to have hard drives anymore. My internet that I use for my house, because it's related to my business, I use it for the podcast, I use it for searching for properties, is a complete write-off. So I write off my personal internet in Canada using US credit card. The reason I do that, same with the Google Drive, is the same thing, and same with my cell phone. I do that because then I have a price in Canada and the US, because the credit card will do a conversion and then I will pay the credit card all these funds with my US funds, profit from my US real estate. So if I want to write this off in Canada and the US, I now have a bank statement, or I guess a credit card statement, that shows the amount in Canadian and the amount in American. So it's much easier to write it off, and so that's why I do it that way. Typically that's the only three things that are on the credit card. So it'll be a Google Drive fee, my internet, and my cell phone. There will be other things sometimes. Oh, and monthly meal. As I've mentioned in many other podcasts, I run an LLC structure for my real estate, and because of that, by law, I'm supposed to meet monthly with each of the shareholders or partners in the LP. So my wife is the partner, and we go out for dinner every month, and I write that off on the American credit card as well. And what the trick to making this legit, in case you ever get audited, is to keep a book. Know what you were talking about. Have minutes about what the agenda was going to be and what you guys talked about, and that will solidify the whole thing so that it's not just you going out for dinner. Don't take your kids. Don't have kids' meals on the bill, because that will also flag the IRS and Canada Revenue to say that this probably wasn't a real business meeting. So once I've checked my credit card over, I create an expense report, and I do it as if I am an employee, like just for like my day-to-day job. If I had expenses, I would write them off to the company. So you have to think of it as like an employee writing your expenses off, and I have like my wife signs off as the authority person on the statement. So that's how I keep everything straight that way. That takes about 10 minutes because I'm just literally typing in a few things into an expense report, and then once I've done that, I have the expense report, I send an email and I get money transferred from my LLC bank account to my personal bank account, because the credit card I have is an American credit card, but it's a personal American credit card, so I don't pay it directly with the LLC, because like I said before, I file an expense report to the LLC, and so then the company, like my LLC, will then pay me that expense amount, and then I pay the credit card with it, just like I'm an employee. So that's the whole thing. I hope that made some sense to somebody. And then I pay the credit card, and all the emails that I send back and forth for transferring money or doing anything, I make a paper trail of everything. So my subject line will be expense report for the month ending March 2018, for instance. So after I do that, I want to update my budget or my income statement for the property. So basically, I just want to make sure that the rent is what I expected and the deposits match the statements from the property manager. So to sum that down, basically I'm going to get a piece of paper from the property manager saying, this is what your rent was. This is the property management fee we're taking off. Most property managers have an additional $2 fee or $4 fee, somewhere in there, for the electronic transfer that they take off every month. After that, it'll be if there was anything that broke and was repaired, and that'll be on there. And so what I want to do is take any repairs that were done, put them in my income statement, and put in the rent and everything else. It's just to match it up. So that's another, I don't know, we'll say 10 minutes, if that. For the people who are regular listeners, I just had a podcast episode a couple weeks ago with Kayla, and I talked about how I like to have everything run evenly every month. I like to have it predictable. So I also have it automatically set up so that I have, I can't even remember the percentage, but I take money out of the account every month and throw it into a savings account. And it's not that I want to save money or, because I know it's a terrible way to actually put money, but it's just to have a separate account that holds money for my CapEx fund and money to pay my accountant whenever tax time comes and any renewals for the LLC. I also do, I call it my budget and my income statement I'll interchangeably use, but on my income statement I just do it in rows in a spreadsheet, and I predict out for at least the year how everything's going to run, and it should run fairly smoothly. Really, for my American real estate, if we're not talking about getting into acquisitions and searching for lenders and running my podcast and doing all the other things, that is pretty much it I do for the American stuff. So it's not a lot of time, and I said 10 minutes for each of those tasks, which is probably, it probably takes me slightly longer than that, but I'm also doing it I'm not doing one property, I'm doing multiple properties, and I found it gets a little bit more complicated when you have property managers that are managing multiple properties for you, because they'll make one deposit and then the expense statement you get from them, the property manager, will be a little bit more complicated because there's multiple properties all together and it's one deposit. And so compared to my Canadian real estate, there is a lot fewer things for properties that are stabilized that I do. I know that a lot of this stuff I could go get property management to do in Canada, and it would close off a lot of these things. But for instance, I know these are not hard tasks, but in Canada I have to pay my property taxes 4 times a year for each property, whereas in the United States, property taxes are part of the mortgage payment. Same with my insurance is part of the mortgage payment. A lot of the note people will want it in there because that way they can ensure the insurance is paid and they can ensure the property taxes are paid, so it's just a little bit safer for them, which it's actually, I would prefer to pay it myself, so I can't really say this is that much of a nuisance. The big one is in Canada I have to collect the rent from the tenants, which is fun. I have one property that they pay me in chunks throughout the month, so I have to keep updating my books and keep checking the bank account throughout the month rather than just checking a mortgage statement. checking a property management statement and just matching it up once. So that just because I have one property that is being problematic as of the last couple months. For tenant turnover in Canada, I do pretty much most of it myself. So there's like painting, magic erasing the walls just to get rid of the scuffs, washing everything. Fridges are disgusting. I do a lot of it myself. I'm doing a tenant turnover actually right now, and I'm outsourcing some of it. I usually do this all myself, but I'm outsourcing all the cleaning. So I'm hiring cleaning ladies. I'm hiring cleaning people to come in and do all the cleaning of the baseboards and the fridges and stuff like that, because I've just had enough of doing that. Did I mention collecting rent? I hate collecting rent, and that's one thing I do myself in Canada. Taking maintenance requests, finding maintenance people to do the calls, or just going and doing them myself, because it's usually something simple. And when it's in the same city as me, it's really hard for me to let go and just pay someone to go do it. Also, in Canada, the prices are phenomenally higher for plumbers, electricians, any sort of general trade. You want someone to go do something simple, it's going to cost way more than it does in the States. I don't know why their labor is so much cheaper, but it is. Dealing with the landlord-tenant board in Ontario, I have to deal with that, and I love spending my time with this. Nobody does, but that's one thing that in the States, these are a lot of things that just property management do. So the reason I do it all myself in Canada, but in the States I have property management that will do it, or hire someone to do it for me. And it's not on my mind at all. It just gets done and dealt with. I just give them a threshold of how much is my maximum before they have to call me. That's basically running the American real estate, and compared to my Canadian real estate. Other things I do are I create a podcast episode every single week. Each interview takes me about 30 minutes to record it, and I cut it down to 15 or 20 minutes. So it's about an hour of editing time. Another thing I do is I talk to listeners. So I probably meet with pretty close to about one a week. People who listen to the show, and I go out for coffee or a beer or some food, and talk real estate. So if you are in the Cambridge area, I am open to going for a hangout for a short time. About 3 or 4 times a year, I go do a speaking gig. So I went to Luc Boiron's one. I think that was my most recent one. How does this podcast get monetized and the speaking gigs? Nothing. I don't really get paid for them at all. I don't get paid for the podcast. I don't get paid for the speaking gigs. I guess sometimes, depending on the thing, I get some gift cards or something small, but really it's karma. I totally believe that if I just keep putting it out there, opportunities will come back to me. I'm just doing this out of the goodness of my heart, and it usually leads to like relationships and partnerships with people on some real estate. Another thing I do is I read a book a month, and I listen to podcasts regularly. And when I say I read a book a month, I probably read a book a year, or maybe 2 a year, but I listen to a book a month. Anyway, I do a lot of driving, so I put on books while I'm driving, so that's how I usually do it. Another thing I do is I have an accountability buddy. So Matt Geerts, he is a guest on episode 12 of the show. He's a wholesaler in the London, St. Thomas area over there. And so we meet every single month, and we just do it online with Skype, and we talk about what we're going to do next month, and we review what we did last month. And it's actually pretty powerful because you feel like you have to get all this stuff done before your meeting, and both of us kind of do it differently, but we just make it work for what our goals are for our real estate, because we're both doing different types of business. But like Matt Geerts, for instance, he's running, he has virtual assistants because he's doing wholesaling, and in my opinion, wholesaling is a lot of work, but he's doing it the right way, where he's getting virtual assistants to actually do a lot of the work for him, so he has a life and he's not just doing the wholesaling all the time, which actually I'm going to have him come back on the show to talk about virtual assistants and hiring people from other countries and the rates and everything else. But side note, anyway, for my accountability, I also, because I'm big on goals, so I do my month that just happened, my month ahead, and then I do goals for every year on my birthday. So every March 2nd, I have what I need to accomplish in 2018, 2019, up to March 2nd. And then everything's to my birthday. So that's how I line everything up for myself. I like to keep myself fairly organized anyway. I do a personal budget, and I can actually go back all the way to 2007. And category-wise, I could tell you what I spent every penny that I've made and did on. A little bit overkill, but anyway, in summary to this whole thing, the real work is getting educated and finding deals and managing renovations. Once the tenants are in place and the property management's in place, there really isn't like a great deal of work. It's just about keeping organized for the IRS and for the Canada Revenue and for your accountant. I know by the time this airs, I will think of another dozen things I probably do, but this is the list I had on my phone. Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone. I will talk to you again next week. Bye.